We are in Revelation 20, and last week we actually were looking at the millennium, what happens during that 1,000 years with the binding of Satan, and we were looking at the resurrection, the way it is put in the Bible, where it says the rest of the dead live not until 1,000 years were finished, and this is the first resurrection. So the last thing we looked at was explaining how the way it is phrased, or the way the verses are divided, tend to give a little wrong impression about what is really being said. So we will move on from there this evening. I know that we also said that one of these days we're going to look at the rapture theory and see how people come to that conclusion. As a matter of fact, I'm almost tempted to go there this evening. Probably, since it's connected to what we looked at last week, maybe I'll just do that. I know there were a couple of persons who were a bit cautious about looking at something that is not true. But as I tried to explain last week, if you never look at what other people say, you are never quite as strong in understanding what you believe. So it is helpful sometimes to look at where other people get their ideas from, because in my case, I know that when I look at the ideas that other people hold to, it either makes me rethink what I believe or it strengthens me in what I believe. And both things are helpful, because if I am wrong, I need to know. So I look at what other people say and I balance it up against what I see in the Bible and what I can understand from the Bible. And a lot of the time I come away feeling so much stronger. As a matter of fact, one of the greatest, if I could use an example that every one of us probably would appreciate, when you look at the teachings of evolution and you look at the teachings of creation, when you look at it logically and even scientifically, you are left with the thinking, how could anybody possibly believe that rubbish? I know that's what happens to me. I am not in the least bit in danger by looking at the ideas of evolution. Not in the least bit. They are so ridiculous compared to the truth that I strengthen my faith by looking at these things. I think to myself, if this is what people believe, oh my goodness, I'm standing on a mountain. I'm way up in the sky. I'm up at the stars. If this is what these wise people and these learned people, if this is what they believe. So, contrary to, I suppose, if you are a person who doesn't have any kind of information and you're a complete novice, then yeah, it might be best for you to keep away from certain things for a while. But once you have a basic understanding of what is true, I find that looking at the other side, it doesn't hurt, it helps. That's my experience and my understanding. So maybe I'm thinking that maybe this evening we'll just take a look at the doctrine of the secret rapture and see where it comes from. Now, let me explain what it is again, and then I'm going to look at what it is based on, because I know a lot of people wonder, where does this idea come from? So basically, this is the idea. This is the idea. This is the idea of the secret rapture, which nobody here believes, least of all me. But here's what they teach. They say, and I understand it very well, because many years ago, as a young Christian, I bought a book that was dealing with it. And I looked at it very thoroughly. It was written by a man named Tim LaHaye. Tim LaHaye, he was one of those very popular teachers of the rapture. And he had books, The Late Great Planet Earth, and other books like this that spoke a lot about the rapture. So I have a good understanding of it, probably maybe even a better understanding than many people who believe it. The reason why people believe it is because they don't know the other side. They don't know the side that we have looked at. They listen to people, they don't study the Bible, and so they just buy into the theory. So the idea is this: the secret rapture theory says that there are two different sets of people that God is dealing with. God deals with the Jews, and then he deals with the Gentiles. And I'm going to give you the passages that they would use to support that as well. So they believe that, we believe in the new covenant and the old covenant, but they believe basically like the old covenant was for the Jews and the new covenant is for the Gentiles. So they believe that the Jews are still God's covenant people, but they are in a different covenant than the Christians. Christians are the Gentile church, and we are in a different covenant than the Jews. I mean, what I'm giving you is a general idea because you might have individuals who have slight variations, but pretty much that is what the popular idea is. So Jesus stopped dealing with the Jews. God stopped dealing with the Jews when Jesus died. That's what they believe. And since that time, he has been dealing with the Gentile church. And the Gentile church, which is the Christian church, is going through what is called the times of the Gentiles. So they believe that any day now, they don't really see any prophetic significance to our existence. They believe that the prophecies of Revelation have to do with the Jews, and they believe that even the Old Testament prophecies have mostly to do with the Jews. The Gentile church, we are in the middle, kind of like the last 2,000 years, and the prophecies don't really apply to us, many of them. But one that they look forward to is where it says that the church will be caught away. Now they see this catching away as a very secret event that nobody in the world will know about except that they will see that people are missing. That's why they call it the secret rapture. The word rapture really means the catching away, the church being caught away. And we know that the church is to be caught away, but we know that it's a public and noisy event. But they understand it to be a secret event. They will use verses like this. They talk about the verses that say that it will come like a thief in the night. And they will use the logic that when a thief comes, you don't know. You only know that the thief has come and gone afterwards when you see something missing. They'll use that kind of argument. They'll use the argument that the statement where Jesus says, in that night, two shall be in the bed, one will be taken and the other left. Two shall be grinding in the field, one shall be taken, the other one shall be left. So you know that there are statements that say this, and so they understand it to be that, like all of us can be in the room and a few are gone and the others left. My wife and I can be here at home and she disappears and I'm left behind. And they have songs that tell the story. There is a song, I don't know if you know it. It's I wish we'd all been ready. Two men walking up the hill. One disappears, the other left standing still. I wish we'd all been ready. So there are songs that teach this. So they believe that when the church is gone, any day now, nobody knows when, because nobody knows the day or the hour. They don't believe in a time of trouble coming before. They don't believe in the mark of the beast coming before. They don't believe in the preaching of the three angels' messages before. All of that, they believe it happens to the Jews. They believe that our time, none of that matters. This is why typically they know very little about the book of Revelation. They hardly study Revelation. And when you and I study Revelation and we are so excited about Revelation, it's irrelevant to them, because their concept is we won't be here at that time. We will be gone in the rapture. So this is why it's only people who think like us who are very focused on the book of Revelation because we believe it will be our experience. They believe it has nothing to do with us. We are going to be gone in the rapture. So anyway, that is what they believe. Now, after the church is taken away, according to them, we're going to go to heaven, or the Gentile church, as they would call it, will go to heaven. Now, they see that this is the end of the times of the Gentiles. So the times of the Gentiles end, and what they understand now is that now we go back to the Jews. So if you will notice, God was dealing with the Jews from the time of Abraham, well, let's say from the time of Moses, when the Israelites were called out of Egypt, and he dealt with the Jews as his special people right up until the time when Jesus died. After that, he stopped dealing with the Jews and he went to dealing with the Gentiles. And now he's finished with the Gentiles, they are gone to heaven, and he goes back to the Jews. So for the next 7 years, in this theory, the Jews once again become God's special people, or they were always his special people, they think. But now he goes back to dealing with the Jews. Now, most of the evangelicals in the world, this is what they believe. And of course, America primarily is a place where it's the face of evangelicals. And they, of course, are very, very fixated on the Jews and on Jerusalem because they wholeheartedly believe that the Jews are still God's special people. And what I'm sharing with you is the idea that they have. So they believe that God goes back to the Jews for 7 years. Now, as I was saying last week, they believe that at this time, the Antichrist will appear. And that is why you hear some people saying that Trump is the Antichrist. At one time, they were saying Obama is the Antichrist. They believe that the Antichrist is a man who will appear just about the time that the church is raptured away. Somebody was saying last week, I forget who it was Brother Kip, that some of them were waiting for the rapture last week, Sunday. Well, you have another great disappointment. Because they think that Trump is the Antichrist. So they believe that the Antichrist will come and the Antichrist will make a covenant with the Jews. And he will make a covenant for 7 years. During that time, they believe the Jews will go back to, they will rebuild the temple. They will rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. They will go back to carrying out the worship service of the law, offering sacrifices and the rest of it. They'll go back and establish the Old Testament system. But in the middle of that 7 years, after 3.5 years, they believe the Antichrist will break his covenant with the Jews. He will break his treaty with the Jews, and he will begin to attack them. He will defile their temple and all kinds of things, and then the Jews will become very greatly persecuted. The nations of the world will turn against them, and at this point they believe 144,000 Jews are going to be converted, and they are going to go out and evangelize and be preaching. They are going to be preaching, the 144,000 Jews. So, but the nations will come against the Jews. They believe that nations like Russia and those northern kingdoms will come down and dry up the Euphrates River so that they can go into attack Israel. And when it looks like Israel is about to be destroyed, Jesus will return. That is after 7 years. Jesus will return and he will destroy the enemies of the Jews and save them. And then all the Jews will accept Jesus at that point. So then Jesus will come back to earth along with the Gentile church that went away with him. Will come back to earth here, and then we will set up a kingdom down here where those of us who are a part of that Gentile church, some of us will be a part of this kingdom, but there will be a system of government in which people like the Jews, are set upon to govern over the earth. So it will be a world in which you have basically the system of the Old Testament set up. They believe that Jesus will rule on the throne of David, and there will be a time of peace here because the lion will lay down by the lamb, and the child shall play with the serpent, and people will live to be 100 years old. Children, they will live out their full lifetime, and everything will be peace. They believe that it will be like when it says in Isaiah, they shall beat their swords into spears, into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks, and everything will be peace for 1,000 years. But it will be a time when Christ will rule with a rod of iron. In other words, there'll be no mercy for those who live a life of sin. They'll be put to death instantly, like under the law. So this continues for 1,000 years under the reign of Christ. At the end of the 1,000 years, they believe that for some strange reason, and of course, one of the reasons why everything will be peaceful for the 1,000 years will be that Satan is locked up in the bottomless pit. And of course, the beast and the false prophet, which they believe to be two people, they'll be thrown into the lake of fire. They'll be burning, but Satan is locked up. And then after 1,000 years, God releases Satan, lets him out of the prison, and lets him loose on the people of earth. We have been living together in peace for 1,000 years under the government of Christ, and everything is nice and everybody's happy. And then God lets out Satan out of the pit and looses him upon us. Now, that is one of the strangest things that I can ever imagine. Why a God of love, after 6,000 years, and puts an end to it and goes another 1,000 years and then lets go Satan again. And there really is no rational or reason behind it that I can fathom. But anyway, that's what they believe. And they believe so. Satan, now that he's loosed, he goes out to these people who have been living in peace for 1,000 years, and he starts to deceive them. And after 1,000 years under Jesus' government, the masses turn to Satan. After living for 1,000 years under the government of Jesus, they turn to Satan by the millions, the number of them like the sand of the sea. And so it is believed that they go to make war against Jesus and against those who remain with him, the few who remain with him. And that is when now they believe fire comes down and destroys all of them, and they are thrown into the lake of fire. And then there's a new heaven and a new earth. Satan is destroyed. There's a new heaven and a new earth. And then they believe eternity will begin. So that 1,000 years, why God would do such a thing is beyond my ability to comprehend. But it is what the rapture theory teaches. So now we understand what the rapture teaches. Now let me see if I can give us a good idea of what is the basis for it. Now let me go and let me share my Bible, and I'll show you the verses that are used to lay the foundation for this rapture teaching. All right, keep praying that everything remains stable. All right, so I'm going to go to the book of Daniel, because strangely enough, they base it on something in the book of Daniel that we also are interested in. Now, I've heard it said that this teaching was invented by a Jesuit by the name of Ribera, not Rivera, but Ribera. The details of it I can't give you because it's not fresh in my mind, but I've heard that it was a Jesuit who concocted this idea of the rapture, and I can well believe it. But I want to show you that every false idea, they do have some kind of, at least some kind of biblical explanation, because if they didn't, nobody would accept it. The question is, This is the alternative explanation, and you also have an explanation. You look at both things and then you ask which makes sense or which makes better sense. That's why I'm comparing both things this evening. So it's Daniel chapter 9. Now, the prophecy in Daniel 9 that is very interesting to us is the prophecy of the 70 weeks. You remember Daniel went to pray because he was concerned, because it seemed to him that the Lord was extending the time of punishment for the Jews. God had said that the Jews would remain in captivity for 70 years. 70 years. Now remember, I said years because I'm going to talk about 70 weeks. And it's two different things. I know that when I was just learning about it, I kind of was mixing up both things, 70 years, 70 weeks. They are two different things altogether. So don't be mixed up. God said the Jews would be in Babylon for 70 years. Now, Daniel had a vision in which he heard about 2,300 days, and it was said to him, the vision shall be for many days at the time of the end. And he came to realize that this 2,300 days was a prophecy that was talking about many years in the future. And God told him that this would be the time when the sanctuary would be restored. So he was confused. He was thinking, but if we are to go back at the end of 70 years, and it's now the end of the 70 years, why is God telling me about something many years in the future? Why? He was confused because he didn't understand that some of the prophecies he was getting was not for his time, but it was for our time after thousands of years. He didn't understand it, so he was confused. So he went to God and started to pray about the matter. In Daniel 9, he's praying. And while he's praying, God sends the angel Gabriel to give him understanding. All right? Now, maybe at this point, maybe I really should have used a chart. Probably I will do this. I didn't intend to get very, very detailed, but maybe I will bring up a chart at some point. All right. I'm going to use a chart here because it will help to explain what I'm trying to say to you. Yes, here's a chart I'm looking for. Give me 1 second. Um, all right. I imagine that you can see my chart. So the angel came to Daniel. Let me go to the Bible and read first. The angel came to Daniel. The angel Gabriel was sent by God to explain to Daniel. And he gave Daniel a certain time period, right? He says, O Daniel, in verse 22, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of your supplications, or when you started to pray, the commandment came forth, and I am now come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore, understand the matter and consider the vision. So the angel says to Daniel, from the time you started praying, God sent me to explain it to you, and I've come to explain. So look here. I want you to consider the vision. Which vision? Consider the vision that you had before about the 2,300 days. That's what he's asking Daniel to consider. Now he goes on to say, now here's where you don't get confused. 70 weeks, not 70 years, 70 weeks. He's not talking about the 70 years. He's talking about a different time period now that he calls 70 weeks. 70 weeks are determined. The word determined, if you look on the right panel where it's from the Revised New American Standard Bible, it says 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city. So what the angel was saying is that God has committed, has decreed, has cut off, has established 70 weeks for your people, which is the Jews, and your holy city, which is Jerusalem. God has determined, God has decreed God has stated that there will be 70 weeks that are given to your people, the Jews. So the whole point about this, brothers and sisters, is that in this chapter, God is talking about a time that has been given to the Jews. This is the basis of a truth that we believe. And it's also the basis of the rapture theory. The idea that a certain time has been given to the Jews. The angel came and told Daniel clearly, 70 weeks have been given to your people. So that's the foundation of it. Let's see how they explain it. So during this time, the angel says this time was given to them to do certain things. It was to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins. It was to make reconciliation for iniquity. It was to bring in everlasting righteousness. It was to seal up the vision and the prophecy. And it was to anoint the most holy. All these things were to happen during that 70-week period. Now, the first thing I want to point out is that this 70 weeks does not mean 70 weeks. I think all of us can understand this. Both we agree and the evangelicals agree, and everybody who studies Daniel chapter 9 seriously will agree that the 70 weeks stand for 70 weeks of years, what they would call prophetic time. In other words, it's 70 multiplied by 7. Each day of those 70 weeks, each day represented a year. So 70 weeks represented 70 times 7 years, which is 490 years. This is one of those passages in the Bible which demonstrates clearly that a day represents a year, sometimes in prophecy, sometimes, not all the time. But anyway, so the angel told Daniel, God has given your people, the Jews, 70 years, 70 weeks. There am I saying 70 years. God has given your people, the Jews, 70 weeks or 490 years. All right, now I'm going to read what he says. You saw what was to happen. An end was to be made of sin, reconciliation for iniquity, anoint the most holy, seal up the vision and prophecy. It's clear when you read it that this is a prophecy that is talking about the work of Jesus. If I read this carefully, what it will say is that I have given you 70 weeks. I've given you 490 years. And during that time, something is going to happen. The transgression is going to come to an end. I will make an end of sins. I will make reconciliation for iniquity. I will bring in everlasting righteousness. I will seal up the vision and the prophecy, and I will anoint the most holy. It's something that God is saying will happen. And we understand that it is God who will do these things. Specifically, it was Jesus Christ who would do these things. Many people make the mistake that I made at the beginning, and that many people, still make, which is that they believe that it was the Jews who were to do these things. The Jews were to stop sinning, and the Jews were to bring in everlasting righteousness and some of these things, and they were to anoint the most holy place. They apply a lot of this to the Jews, but it had to do with Jesus. Now, look at how he divides up the time. He says, okay, now, please understand. From the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem. So he gives Daniel a starting point. He tells Daniel what is going to happen. He says, look here, there's going to be a command that is given that says that Jerusalem is to be restored and to be rebuilt. Remember, Jerusalem was in ruins at the time. The Jews were in Babylon. Now they were expecting to go back to Jerusalem, and that is what Daniel was praying about. So the angel says, look here, they are going to give a command to restore Jerusalem and to rebuild Jerusalem. And you start counting from that time. All right, to count these 70 weeks or these 490 years, you start counting from the time when the commandment is given. Now, I'm going to just give you a date. Or I'll come to the date in a little while. Let me explain the thing first, and then we'll come to the date. He says, first of all, now, from the time that the commandment is given until the Messiah, the Prince, and this is clearly Jesus, right? Until the coming of the Messiah, who is the Prince, Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He says there's going to be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Now he says this in a strange kind of way. Why did he not just say there'll be 70, there'll be 69 weeks? 69, that's 79, right? 69, 62 plus 7, that's 79, 69. 3 score is 60. And 2, that's 62. And 7, that's 69. Why does the angel divide up the time like this? He says there shall be 7 weeks, then 3 score and 2 weeks. There's a reason. Just bear it in mind, and I'll come to the reason in a little bit. Then he gives Daniel an outline of what is to happen in that period. He says the street shall be rebuilt again. That is the street of Jerusalem and the wall of Jerusalem. Even in troublous times, there'll be a lot of trouble while they were rebuilding the wall. You know, there were enemies around at that time. Some men called Tobias and Sanballat, who tried their best to stop the work and tried to make trouble against the Jews. But the angel says the streets and the walls of Jerusalem shall be rebuilt. Then he goes on to say, and after 3 score and 2 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. All right, so what he's saying is that, okay, there'll be 7 weeks, and then there'll be 62 weeks. So when he says the street and the walls shall be rebuilt again, he's saying that for the first 7 weeks, that's 49 years, 7, 7, 49. For the first 49 years, during the first 49 years, so the king would give the command to rebuild the city, rebuild the streets and the walls. And then they would take 49 years and they would be building the streets again and they would be rebuilding the walls in a time of trouble. So 7 weeks pass. Then he goes to the 69 weeks now, the 62 weeks now. And 62 times 7 is how much? It's 480 something, I think. But anyway, I'll tell you in a moment. It says then there will be 62 weeks. And after that, sometime after that, the Messiah will be cut off. So this takes us to the time of Jesus. But not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So the prince that would come was the Romans under Titus. After Jesus was cut off, 70 years later, they destroyed Jerusalem, the city and the sanctuary. And it says the end shall be with a flood. And to the end of the war, desolations are determined. Now let me pause a little bit and see if I went over anybody's head. I tried to say that as simply as I could without using a chart. I'm going to come to a chart in a minute, but in case, just in case, I said something or I lost you along the way, only on that basis, can you please let me know if you got lost along the way? I don't want any, I'm asking you not to make any general comments or anything, and not to go off on a tangent. But if there's a question concerning what I just highlighted, let me
I
take
have a question. Thank you,
yes.
Brother David. Um, when you say, when it says 7 weeks and 3 score and 62 weeks, I got the 7 weeks. But from my understanding, the 3 score is 60 and 2 more weeks. You said that came out to 69 or something to that effect. Now,
Seven,
am
7 plus
I looking
62
at
is
weeks as 7 days
no.
per week, or for the 2 weeks? Because then in my mind, it's 14, and I could be wrong.
All right. I ask you to look at this chart. You can see it, right?
Huh?
Now this is what it is saying. All right. Here is the. I don't know if you can see. Can you see the numbers on this on the chart?
Yes.
I think if somebody's on a phone, it might be challenging. But the first number at the extreme left,
Yes.
if you look, there's a little semicircle, a little arc, which says 7 weeks. The number says 457 BC, but above it, it says 7 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let me see. I think I need to
I see
use,
it.
all right, I'm just wondering if everybody else can see it.
Oh, okay.
So I probably um all right, okay, everybody else can. Okay, so you have 7 weeks. During the 7 weeks, the streets and the walls were rebuilt.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was 62 weeks, the 3 score and 2 weeks. This is second arc.
Yeah.
So 3 score and 2 is 62. Plus the 7 makes 69. So you have 69 weeks.
Oh, okay. I got it. Yeah, I got it.
And then now that leaves one remaining week to make the 7.
Mm-hmm.
So, but God divides it up in three parts. In the message, He says there'll be 7 weeks, then there'll be 3 score and 2, and then there'll be 1 week. And now He's going to tell us what happens in each of those divisions. In the first 7 weeks, the streets and the walls are rebuilt. Then 62 weeks pass after that, and then comes the Messiah. And sometimes after this, the Messiah is killed, and we're going to get the details about the death of the Messiah. So that is what I was really saying, Sister Talia. All right. Now we come down to the last verse, and this is a verse that causes the difficulty or the confusion. Now, up to this point, believe it or not, the people who believe the rapture are pretty much in agreement with us. Up to this point, like I said, almost every Christian, when you look at this passage, it's hard to get away from it. You have some scholars who are into higher studies and they're up in the air somewhere where I don't know, where they try to give some fanciful explanation. But for the most part, most Christians, most normal Christians, sorry to use that word, but it's true. They believe pretty much what we believe because you don't have an alternative. It's too clear. They have a little difference in one or two of the dates, maybe a year or two, but pretty much it's the same thing. But when you come to the last week now, they agree about the rebuilding of the streets and the walls. They agree about the 62 weeks coming to the Messiah. But the last week is where the difference takes place. And that's why let's look at the last week now and see what it means and see how they interpret it. Now it says for this last week, He. Who is this He? We believe the He, let me say I, because I don't even know what everybody here believes, but I think most of you will believe like me. So let me say we. We believe that the He here is referring to the Messiah. Look at what the verse before says. After 3 score and 2 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. Right? But then it goes on to say, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Now, when you come down and it says, and he shall confirm the covenant, is it talking about the Messiah? Or is it talking about the prince that shall come? Now, we know that the prince that shall come was Titus. But that is where it gets very, very sticky with the rapture theory. So you have two people that are mentioned in verse 26, the Messiah and the prince that shall come. Who is this he? Which one of them is it? There is the Messiah and there is the prince that shall come. We understand the Messiah to be Christ, of course, and the prince that shall come is the Roman general Titus, who came and destroyed the city and the sanctuary, and brought in the abomination of desolation and so forth. Now, the people who believe in the rapture believe that there is a block in the middle of this passage. They believe that the prince that shall come here is the Antichrist at the end of time. Now I know you will be flabbergasted because I am flabbergasted too. What they believe is that, okay, we are going on okay. We are talking about Jesus. 62 weeks, the Messiah shall be cut off. But all of a sudden, there is a gap where we jump forward 2,000 years, and we are talking about the prince that shall come, who is the Antichrist, and he would destroy the city of Jerusalem and the sanctuary that the Jews have rebuilt. How do they get there? How do they jump from Jesus in the middle of the verse, Jesus as the Messiah being crucified, and they jump 2,000 years into the future? Look at verse 27, and we will clarify how they get there. Now, when it says he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, we understand Jesus comes and he confirms the covenant with the Jews. He's sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and he tells them he has not come to destroy the law or the prophet, he has come to fulfill it. But in the midst of that week, in the midst of those, after those 3.5 years, in the middle of that last week, that last 7 years, he brings an end to the sacrifices and the offerings by his death. When he died, the veil of the temple was torn in two, and the sanctuary service and the old covenant system was finished with. It says, and for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. When Jesus was leaving Jerusalem, he says, behold, your house is left unto you desolate. So Jesus made it desolate by departing from Jerusalem, and the Spirit of God leaving Jerusalem. Their time of probation was over, and it was made desolate until the consummation that was, and the thing that was determined shall be poured upon the desolate. This is referring to the destruction of Jerusalem by the Roman armies in AD 70. Now, that is my understanding, and I think most of us understand this, and this makes absolute sense to me. Now, the people who believe in the rapture, verse 27, let me tell you what they say. They believe that the he shall confirm the covenant is referring to the Antichrist. They believe that the prince that shall come, as I said, is the Antichrist. And when they say the Antichrist, they mean a man who will come at the end of time, and he will start making friendship with the Jews. As I said, some people say it is Trump, some said it was Obama, all kinds of nonsense. So they believe he will make a covenant with the Jews. Then it's not talking about the old covenant or the new covenant. It's talking about some kind of agreement that this Antichrist will make with the Jews. And he will make this agreement for 1 week or for 7 years. Now, at this time, they believe the Christian church is already gone. This is when Jesus goes back to working with the Jews. So you say, how do we get to this? Because Jesus died 2,000 years ago. How do the Jews come into the picture? What they say is that between verse 26 here and verse 27 here, there is a great gap. I am not kidding you. If you go on the internet and look up the gap theory, you will find it. They invent a 2,000 years gap and they put it in the verse, and they say, but in the verse it says that the Messiah shall be cut off, and then bang, God stops dealing with the Jews, and he puts in a gap of 2,000 years, and then 2,000 years later the verse continues. So they say there is a gap in the verse, and they put that gap in the verse simply for the purpose of making the theory fit. There's nothing in the verse that suggests that there's any gap. The Lord says 70 weeks. So they say the Jews got 69 weeks, and then there's a gap of 2,000 years, and then they will get the last week. You see what I'm saying? So they say there's 69 weeks. Then God says to the Jews, stop, no more. I stopped dealing with you. Now I'm going to deal with the Gentiles. So he deals with the Gentiles for 2,000 years. And after that, now he says, okay, I'm done with you Gentiles. I'm going back to the Jews. And so the last week or the last 7 years is fulfilled after that 2,000 year gap. Now, all right, I see Sister Talia's hand is up. I want to find out if everybody understands what I just said. And remember, what I just said is the other belief. It's not my belief, it's not our belief. It's the other belief that is very popular in the Christian world. And it's good that we understand what they base it on, because you need to understand. Yeah, to be very generous, I'm saying that you have to understand the nonsensical basis on which it is built. Go ahead, Sister Talia.
Yes, I agree with you, brother, that we do have to understand it because it's going to come at us. In verse 26, how do they justify, and I don't know if you have the answer, but how is it justified that they they have their perspective of the 7 years when it says Jerusalem will be destroyed? How do they get from there? I mean, from the week 70 weeks to the future? And I'm assuming or whatever his name was the one that came up with that. But I don't understand the logic behind how they get from the destruction of Jerusalem to future.
Sure.
It doesn't make sense to me.
Right. I think the fault is mine, because I'm putting the gap maybe at the end of verse 26 when it really should really be in the middle of verse 26. They would put the gap. Let me show you where they will put the gap. It says, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. That's where they will put the gap, right after himself. And then now, 2,000 years later, they say, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. Unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. So they think that by the time you come to this part of the verse, we are already 2,000 years later. We're already gone back to the Jews. That's where they put the gap, after himself. So I think I gave you wrong information there when I said it's at the end of verse 26. So thank you for the question, because it helps me to
Thank
clarify.
you.
Right. So now let me say something. Let me, to be perfectly honest and to be perfectly fair, let me explain a little difficulty with our explanation. All right. Now I don't think it's a real significant difficulty, but I want to put it in there too, because I want us to understand thoroughly. Now, notice this, what they how they put it. After 62 weeks, the Messiah shall be cut off. If you look back at this chart here, go back to the timing that we were looking at. There's seven. Okay, this arc here. Can you see my cursor moving? Can you see my cursor moving? Let me know. Can you see the cursor moving? Can somebody answer me?
Yes.
All right. So this line that I'm traveling along is the 70 weeks, or the 490 years. All right. As I said, it was divided into three sections. You had 7 weeks, then you had 62 weeks, then you had 1 week. Now look what it says. The first 7 weeks, the streets and the walls are rebuilt. The next 62 weeks takes you to the Messiah, the Prince. And it says, after the 62 weeks, the Messiah shall be cut off. So the Messiah would be cut off right at this point. So that would leave 7 years. The way we explain it, our explanation is not perfectly word for word accurate. Let me tell you what I mean. The 7 weeks is fine. The street and the walls are rebuilt. 62 weeks, it's fine. The Messiah comes at the end of the 62 weeks. That was the time when Jesus was baptized by John. But it says after 62 weeks he would be cut off. And in actual fact, Jesus did not die at the end of the 62 weeks, because he died 3.5 years later. If you look at the verse and you take it literally, exactly as it reads, it says, after 62 weeks, the Messiah shall be cut off. So if you are very technical, you would say, okay, that means Jesus should have died in AD 27. The year when he was baptized is the year when he should have died. But he didn't. It was 3.5 years later. So if you are technical, you will say he would have died not after 62 weeks. He was not cut off after 62 weeks. He was cut off after 65.5 weeks. Now, I hope you're understanding what I'm saying. So that is a little glitch in our explanation. But the way I understand it is that what God is saying is that you'll have 7 weeks, then you'll have 62 weeks, and sometime after the 62 weeks, during the Messiah's ministry, he's going to be cut off. He was not saying he's going to be cut off exactly after 62 weeks, even though the verse seems to say that. But God is saying you have the 7 weeks, then you have the 62 weeks, and then the last 7 weeks represents the covenant of the Messiah with the Jews, and he's going to be cut off during that period. Now, I am explaining this because if you belong to those who teach the rapture and you are looking for fault, you might find fault with this explanation. So I wanted to put that in. Let me stop a little bit and see if everybody follows what I just said and understands my argument. If you don't, then please let me know. I'm trying my best to explain it as simple as I can. But if you don't understand, please let me know. All right, wonderful. So you understand the other point of view, and you understand our point of view, and you understand the little glitch that exists or that seems to exist in our point of view. But the other side doesn't have a glitch. It's like a mountain to climb over, because they have invented a 2,000 years and dropped it into the verse when there is not a single hint in the verse of any gap. The language just flows. The Messiah, then it will be cut off, and then the prince that shall come. Where do you get this 2,000 year gap from? You have to invent it to fit the rapture theory. You have to invent it to make God stop. In the middle of the verse, God says, okay, stop. I'm no longer dealing with the Jews. I'm going to drop in at 2,000 years and I'm going to go to the Gentiles. And then afterwards, I'll come back to the Jews for the last 7 years, for the last week. And if you think it is nonsensical, you are being generous. Okay? Because it's worse than nonsensical. It's ridiculous. And that is why the doctrine of the rapture and the 7 year tribulation that follows, it makes no sense. It is based, I do not kid you, it is based on this passage here in the book of Daniel. And I will also tell you that probably 90% or more of the people who believe in the rapture do not understand this. They don't know why they believe it. They don't know where it comes from. They talk about a 7 year tribulation, they talk about a secret rapture, and they will look at the verses that say, two shall be in the bed, one taken on the other left. But once you begin to look at the thing in detail, they don't know where it comes from and where they get that 7 year from, the 7 year tribulation. They don't know where it comes from. But this is a passage that it is all based on. Now there are many other reasons to reject the teaching of the secret rapture and the whole confusion that goes with it, the coming of the Antichrist and so on. I'm going to look at one other passage that highlights why this cannot be. And then I'm going to pause for questions if there are any. But let's go back to the Bible, and I want to go to a New Testament passage that strongly and clearly refutes this idea of some kind of secret rapture. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, you know the passage very well, but it is so explicit. Paul says, now we beseech you, brethren. I'm begging you, I'm pleading with you, I'm asking you something, brothers and sisters. By the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and by our gathering together unto him. If you look at the NASB, it says, I'm asking you, brethren, with regard to the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him. Paul says, what I'm talking about is the coming of the Lord and our being gathered together to him. Paul is talking about the event that we call the rapture. Not the secret rapture, but the rapture, our being gathered together to the Lord. That's what he's talking about. And he says, I'm asking you something, I'm begging you something. Let me read it in the NASB, just because the language is a little simpler. The right panel. I'm requesting you that you not be quickly shaken from your composure or be disturbed either by a spirit or a message or a letter as if from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. What he's saying is that don't let yourself be disturbed, don't let your peace of mind be disturbed. If a spirit tells you, or you get a message from me, or a letter from me to say that the day of the Lord has arrived, Paul is very explicit. Do not let no one in any way deceive you. Don't let anybody fool you. For it will not come, that is, the day of the Lord will not come unless the apostasy comes first and the man of lawlessness, the man of sin is revealed, the son of destruction or the son of perdition. So, to make things clear, which comes first? Is it the coming of Jesus or is it the Antichrist? Which comes first? According to what Paul says, Paul is specifically talking about the coming of Jesus, and he says, don't let anybody fool you. Before Jesus comes again to gather his people, the man of sin or the Antichrist must come first. Now, in the doctrine of the rapture, Jesus comes first and we are caught up with him. Then the Antichrist comes. Then the Antichrist comes and makes his covenant with the Jews. That is the teaching of the rapture. So it is directly, diametrically opposed to what the Bible says. The Bible says the man of sin, the Antichrist, must come first. God's people are going to be here to face the Antichrist and to face the mark of the beast and all of that. The rapture theory says, no, we will be gone. Then the Antichrist comes. This is why the people who believe in the rapture are not preparing to go through the great tribulation. That is why they don't, as I said, they don't study Revelation. They're not concerned about it because it has nothing to do with them. But the word of God is very specific. Paul says that first of all, there comes the Antichrist or the man of sin who opposes, and I'm not going to deal with who that is this evening because there's a certain amount of questions I have myself. But it says that this person opposes this person or this principle or this spirit or these people, whatever, opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. And one thing I am pretty much persuaded about is that this temple of God is not the Jewish temple. Absolutely not. I believe that there are two expressions of the temple of God. Not I believe, the Bible tells us there are two expressions of the temple of God today. One of them is your body is the temple of God, and the other one is the Christian church. I lean to the idea that this Antichrist, whether it's a person or a people or a philosophy, it exists in the Christian church. Right? I really am not seeing that it refers to something inside of our bodies as our physical body, as me as an individual. No, I don't believe, I lean very strongly against that. But anyway, that's a discussion for another day. So, all right, this is where I'm going to stop for this evening with the hope that you have a better understanding of the rapture theory and you have an idea why it is so harmful and unscriptural is how I will put it. It is so unscriptural. All right, so let me see if there are Brother Kip. Yes, Brother Kip, go ahead.
So, what do you think that falling away entails? Is that do you think that's like when the mark of the beast starts to come upon the people when the man of sin is revealed, or what?
Well, this is why I have some questions because when I look at Paul says there has to come a falling away first. I believe that the falling away took place shortly after the death of the apostles. I believe that that falling away took place in those dark ages. This is one of the greatest falling aways that you ever had in the history of the world, where the church that started as the apostolic church became so wrapped up in darkness. So I think that would fulfill that great falling away, Brother Kip. As to whether or not there is to be another similar falling away at the end of time, well, it's quite likely. I mean, if everybody is going to, if the church is going to have the mark of the beast imposed on it, the abomination of desolation, yes, there is likely to be another falling away, or not likely. There's certain to be another falling away, but you could say that it applies to that dark ages falling away, or it applies to this end time falling away. It depends on who we see as this Antichrist, man of sin. And as I said, I am examining that with greater care to see if I can come up with a more solid understanding than I have at present. So I don't want to answer too many questions about that part of it at the moment. All right, I think I see Sister Talia and Brother Ray. I think Brother Ray, the order I see, I think you were first. So go ahead.
Thank you, David. I was waiting for something like this because this goes back to back with the false doctrine of the Trinity that no one knows where it comes from in reality, but they believe in it by faith because it has been pawned down to them through traditions. Um, so that's my comment. But I have a question though. Um, when Jesus was preaching on the earth, that there were many antichrists around him. Did he said that their house was left desolate while he was there? Did he mean that he was leaving them desolate, without no communication, or did he mean that after his departure to heaven, or did he just mean it right there and then that he was leaving their house desolate?
I think to some extent, Brother Ray, his words were prophetic because as you rightly say, was it left desolate at that very instant when he said it? Well, he was crucified shortly after. That is true, but even then, the disciples, they continued to preach mostly to the Jews, so grace was still extended to them. I think what he meant was your place as God's special people, your place as God's instrument, your place as a people who have special favor from God has ended. And I think that that was true the moment they killed him, right? Because that was the end of the old covenant. So Jesus was, when he said, your house is left unto you desolate, I think he is really saying your place in God's plan, your special place is over. From now on, your place as a nation has been ended. I think that's what he meant. But he didn't mean that there's no more grace for you as individuals, because it was the gradual eroding of that nation where they came to the place where wrath fell upon them was 70 years, was AD 70. 40 years later, when the Romans came upon them and wiped out that entire city and slaughtered over a million of them. But it took it took a while till that actually came to full fruition. So I think they being left desolate was, first of all, their rejection as God's people, then the departure of the Holy Spirit as they crucified the apostles and the prophets and rejected anything to do with Christ. That eventually became their full condition.
Thank you, Dave.
Uh,
I exhort everyone here to study out this study that you have given because we are in the end times events where people believe this here, and we need to be able to understand how to explain this issue to them. That's why I had asked you last week about it, and I thank you very much for this presentation.
my brother Ray. Um, Sister Talia, I see your hand up. I'm not sure if it was from the first time or still there. So you can go ahead if your hand is up.
No, it's another question. And could you please pull up the chart for me again so I can
Sure.
ask my question? Thank you. Okay, so um the last week, 3.5 year, 3.5 years
Yes.
is when Jesus, in the middle of the 7 weeks, 3.5 years was when Christ was cut off. Am I getting that exact or no?
Right. Not 7 weeks, 7 days.
7 days. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, you're right.
Oh, okay. So, having said that, then the latter part of the 3.5 years What?
Right. Good question. Now, some say it extended to the time when Stephen was stoned.
Okay.
That the 7 years came to an end. I mean, when I look at the Bible, I see something else that seems to fit better for me. I don't know the time, but if the time of the Jews came to an end, I would think it would begin with the gospel going to the Gentiles. So when Peter had his vision and God sent him to Cornelius, I don't know historically when that happened, but I would think that that event was more um, a more fitting event to mark the end of the Jews and the beginning of the Gentiles. So I don't know if that I have to look at the timing of the vision that Peter had, but as of at the moment, I would think that when the time of the Jews came to an end would have been when God says you go to the Gentiles.
Yes, that would logical. Okay, thank you.
Okay,
But you're not saying that that would be the case, other than stoning.
but I don't know historically what time Peter had the vision. Maybe I need to look it up. But I am saying that in terms of what actually happened, the event itself, that would be far more fitting than the death of Stephen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because the death of Stephen is almost like an arbitrary thing, because James was also beheaded, um, I think earlier than that. So why not say the death of James? I don't know why they picked that time. But anyway, yeah, that's how it is, Sister Talia. Sister Suzanne, go ahead.
Well, the Bible tells us that when Stephen died, all the Jews except for the disciples were forced to leave Rome or Jerusalem, wherever they were, and that's when the message went to the rest of the world, because they weren't leaving there to spread it like Jesus had asked them to. But when Stephen was stoned, they were forced to. That I thought that's how it was. The Bible pretty much says that they were forced to go.
I
Anyway,
I I, I understand, but apparently it seems very clear that when they left Jerusalem, they went everywhere preaching only to Jews.
oh, okay.
Because when Peter got the vision and they heard that he had gone to Gentiles, everybody was upset. Peter had to tell them that God sent, he had to tell them about the vision he had to convince them. And then they were amazed and they said, then God has also granted salvation to the Gentiles. And they were amazed. So it seems very clear that nobody was preaching to the Gentiles before that point. Sister Jema, go ahead. Sister Jema, I'm not sure if you're trying to talk or where are you? I see the name, but I don't see the hand. All right, I see Sister Jema's hand up, but I'm not hearing her. Um, all right, let me let Brother Judah, you go ahead, and then maybe Sister Jema will get on afterwards.
So you're saying that the stoning of Stephen was not the watershed moment in terms of the movement of the ministry to the wider world? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, if you look at the evidence, it's very clear that even after Stephen died, although the disciples were scattered, they clearly never had a ministry to the Gentiles. They clearly were not preaching to the Gentiles because Peter's experience gave such amazement to them. It's clear they could not have been preaching to Gentiles. So the message to the Jews still continued, to the Jews exclusively, still continued up until Peter's vision.
Okay, so you're saying the watershed moment is Peter's vision.
Yes, that's what I think. I'll just have to look at it to see what was the timing. Where do they have any idea of when it happened, what year? Because it would have to be something that happened around about 3.5 years after the death of Jesus.
How did that coincide with the Pauline experience on Damascus? Do you know?
I have no idea. That would have been my first choice, but I think most people tend to think it was later than that. So I have to look at it. I'll have to. I'll do a little research, and maybe we could do the same. But I want to see if any of the dates would come close to that time.
Thanks.
You're welcome, Brother Judah. Um, All right. It seems like Sister
I
Jim.
have a question. No, I don't have a question. I'm sorry, Brother David. Can I get a copy of that chart sent to my email, please?
Sure, I'll happily send it, Sister Talia.
Thank you.
All right. Sister Jima seems to have been knocked off the platform. I don't see
Okay,
her.
can you hear me?
Hearing you now.
Okay, sorry, I had to switch my microphone. I have a question regarding the falling away. When you're talking about it happened during the apostolic time, do you believe it is coinciding with when John is referring to, and every spirit that confesses not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God, and this is the spirit of Antichrist, whereof you have heard that should come, and even now already is in the world. So obviously, the spirit of Antichrist came in while he was still alive. Do you think that that's referring to the same, um, as far as what you were referring to in the Second Thessalonians?
I there are three things that are suggested in the New Testament, and that is one of them. The other two is where Paul says, "After my departure shall grievous wolves come in, not sparing the flock, and even from among your own selves shall men arise speaking perverse things." And the other one is where Paul says, "For the mystery of iniquity doth already work." So there are these three passages that suggest that even from the time of the apostles, there was a growing apostasy in the church. And if it was already true in the time of John and Paul, then it's not hard to understand why it deteriorated so rapidly over the next few centuries. Now, real question, or the question behind all of this, is your question: does it mean that the Antichrist came during that dark ages? But what it does say is that the Antichrist will come following the apostasy. This is why I'm kind of in limbo, because I know that the establishment of the papacy was one of the great apostate acts of history. I am not denying, and I will not deny the idea that the papacy is the great antichrist of the historical church. No question. But what is in my mind is that many passages in the Bible seem to suggest a last day manifestation of the Antichrist that is specific and special and more than just a historical Antichrist. Several passages in the Bible seem to point in that direction. So I am in limbo a little bit because I want to look at that more closely before being set in stone on my conclusion.
Okay, the reason why I asked that was not necessarily the focus on the Antichrist, but more on the terminology of the falling away. Because if we're being consistent and thinking about a last day application of the falling away, I kind of wanted to have that same consistency. So falling away in the time of the apostles was like a general, wolves in sheep clothes coming in, false doctrines being taught, emphasis on needing the law, circumcision of the Gentiles, all of that. And so if we're using that general idea as opposed to a very specific event, then if we're to apply that for the end times, then are we to look for that same general concept versus a specific event?
Okay, I see what you mean. And yeah, I would tend to agree. If we look at the principle of that we have been looking at recently of type and antitype, then yes, it's logical to suppose that if there's a return of the falling away principle, then it's going to follow the same pattern as what happened in the days of the apostles. And I think that makes sense because what we are seeing as we are looking at the Bible more closely is that the events tend to repeat themselves. The principles come back again and again. The same spirit comes back because Satan's methods, they take on a different garb, but the principles remain the same. So yeah, I would agree with that generally, Sister Jema. Brother Joshua. Brother Joshua.
Hey, hi, brother David. How you doing? How you doing, buddy?
Praise
Good.
them.
Yeah, man. We passing through some trials, huh? But you know, God is good. You know, I wanna kind of piggyback on brother Andrew's sentiments this morning. You know, we're living in crazy times, and you know, Daddy is ramping up our experience with this platform. Um, you know, we talk about the latter rain and all that, but you know, I believe we on this platform are feeding on things that nowhere else anyone is able to access. And you know, in a great part because of you yourself, brother David, of course. So I want to encourage everybody. It might seem like we're just on another place, killing some time or whatever, but you know, I personally, I've given over myself completely, as many of you have, to seeking out the spiritual walk with an intensity that we never have before, because we recognize that these times are not normal times. And so, you know, Brother David, I really want to thank you, encourage everyone that each word that's being spelled out here in detail, these are not things that we should take lightly, because, as I said before, these are crazy times, and Daddy is ramping up our access to knowledge that there is nowhere else, to be honest. And let us carefully, you know, sit down with everything that we're learning. And knowledge is good; it goes to the head. But more than that, let's try to push that knowledge into our spirit somehow. I do a lot of silent stuff, meditation, prayer, and stuff, and it helps me. And whatever is your, whoever is listening here today, whatever is your way of getting closer to Daddy, let's not waste it. People are dropping like flies everywhere, I'm telling you. And I mean, you know, I live in Canada, and I go out every Saturday morning, and it's crazy out there, and nobody has anything or any interest in anything spiritual. And so, Brother David, I want to thank you, really thank you from the bottom of my heart. Since I started here a few years ago, learned so much, as of all of us. I pray that Daddy will keep you going for another 100 years. I don't know. But keep you going strong. You seem pretty strong. So thanks a lot. And I want to encourage everybody here to don't take this lightly. This is this is life and death happening on this platform. God bless. Thanks everybody.
Brother Joshua, thank you. Much appreciated. And I appreciate your prayers. And God is amazing. That's the only word we all can say.
Yeah.
I am just so grateful.
Mm.
That is 100% the only sentiment I can feel, you know. So praise the Lord. Brother Andrew and Sister Jema.
Uh, just have a quick point, brother. Just as Brother Joshua was speaking, I just felt impressed. You know, we as human beings, it's past Sabbath hours, and I was doing a little exercise, so I may sound a little breathless. Just doing a little bicep curl there. So listening. What what I am moved to say, my brother. Second, I really believe that wonderful things are happening on this platform week after week. Every week, as we'd say in Jamaican parlance, fire gashing. And as human beings, even in Jesus' time, he often spoke about how you say people want to see a sign. People are moved by great, tremendous outpouring of the power of God, and understandably so, because in the time of Jesus, he went about healing the sick. I mean, I was reading Matthew in the interregnum between the morning and the afternoon there. And as soon as he came up from the water, great miracles began to be wrought. People brought their deaf, their dumb, their lame, their blind, and they were being healed. And we kind of expect the same manifestation. But you know, the Spirit moved me. Prior to Jesus's ministry, there was John the Baptist. Prior to the outpouring in Acts of the latter of the early rain, as we'd say, they were in the upper room. And I imagine that during the upper room, they were going over the things that happened during the life of Christ. I'm just exploring. I'm not suggesting that it says so. We don't know the fullness of everything that was happening in the upper room prior to the outpouring, but they were in one accord. And I imagine that all the disciples were recounting all the scenes that happened in Jesus' life. And there was a settling in to the truth in terms of what the ministry meant and what their role may be in the ministry, in keeping with what he was telling them while he was on the earth. So could it be that just as how the advent of Jesus' ministry was prefaced by John the Baptist's ministry, talking about the kingdom of God is at hand, it is also very important for us settling into the truth. And the truth, for instance, the truth that we're getting week after week after week is for that purpose. It's, as it were, the precursor to the actual manifestations of the Spirit manifesting in glorious works of healing and all of that. Before that must come a settling into the fundamental truths that God needs his army to understand. That's my little...
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Judah. And I think that's one thing that I can't deny. I think God is preparing us. I know that, I've heard it said that this is not a time when we should be focusing on doctrine. I hear it from people in different places. It's not doctrine that is important, but the thing is that doctrine is the fruit of Bible study, and doctrine is a foundation of faith. You can't have faith without a doctrine. If you have faith without a doctrine, you believe in nothing. Doctrine is a foundation of faith, and the great faith of the last generation will be founded on the doctrines that they believe. The Bible teachings are doctrines, and they are there, and they are deep. They are like an unfathomable well. My mind is blown every time I go to the Bible. I am amazed at the God who designed and put these things there, and it's there for us. It's there for us because God is going to use these doctrines, these doctrinal truths, to lift us into higher places. So I'm not saying that, as Daniel was saying this morning, it's not that anybody who doesn't believe these doctrines is lost. I don't believe so. But I believe doctrine lifts us into a higher place and qualifies us more fully for God's purposes for the time. And I see that happening, as you are saying. I see that happening. I see God preparing us for something, and I am eagerly anticipating, like I'm sure everybody else. I think Sister Jema and then Sister Talia.
Okay. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but going back to the concept of falling away, as Christians and even non-Christians, they hear a lot of the term mark of the beast. People hypothesize on what that is, especially with the pandemic. People said all sorts of things. And also the concept of the abomination that makes desolation, especially within the Adventist teaching. They focus a lot about that. And only after the earlier question by a brother that asked about the falling away, could it be also a later end time application came into my mind. Our Father has just been so amazing as far as how mind-blowing He's been blessing us with what studies you've been presenting. And so he always warns us, and He always gives us something to grasp onto as far as keys to make sense of the times that we're living in on this timeline. And it's almost like we haven't really paid much attention. I'm not talking about us in this group, but in general, what this falling away is, because it's so significant in my mind now when it says, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day, which is the coming of the Lord, which is huge for every single one of us Christians, except there come a falling away. So if that falling away is just the general falling away that happened during the time that John and possibly the other, well, not possibly, during the time that John, Paul, the other apostles were alive, it can't be just that general falling away. It has to be something so big. So in my mind came to, could this falling away first that has to happen be related to the abomination that makes desolate and really does do the shaking and the separating of those, the wheat and the tare? I mean, this now in my mind is so huge. I mean, I just took it for granted that, yeah, the falling away is going to come first. You'll see the wheat from the tares, and that's going to happen. And you've seen that from the very beginning, even during the time of the apostles. There's been the wheat and the tares, but God has said, leave it, because we don't want to tear out the wheat, leave it to the end. But now this is just so huge in my mind, and there's got to be something that God wants to reveal in our studies, a connection with Daniel of the abomination that makes desolate, or the desolation of abomination, along with the mark of the beast that's going to come. Because to me, it is so huge now, except they're coming and falling away. So just the comments that other people have made and what you shared was really bringing to my mind that there is something significant with this falling away. I'm not saying it's a one thing event, but oh my goodness, it is huge. What are we supposed to look for? It's humongous in my mind now. And so, again, I don't want to beat a dead horse and I don't want to obsess about it, but I think based on the conversations that people have brought up and what you've brought to our attention in our studies, this is humongous as far as connecting this with the abomination of desolation and the mark of the beast.
Yeah, thank you for the thought, Sister Talia. And I agree. And I think that one thing I know is that the Lord is helping us to see things. He's teaching us things. I mean, I never lose the image now of Jesus walking in the halls of my mind. That's the way I put it sometimes in talking to him in the morning. He's walking in the halls of my mind. And I know because of this that there's nothing we can't understand. I mean, not just me, but I think one advantage I have is that I am spending the time. I keep talking about in the mornings when I get up to pray. When I'm alone with the Lord, that is when my mind is flooded with light. And I'm talking to the Lord, and He's just throwing ideas at me. And I believe that is, He's walking in the halls of our minds. And so, these things that you're mentioning there, I have no doubt that whatever is true, He's going to show us in a clear way. So, we won't be groping in the dark, as it were, but things will be clear. But thank you for the thought. I see Sister Talia again, then Sister Susan, in that order.
I'm sorry also to keep but there's always questions. So I interact with a lot of the Protestant church members and stuff like that. And so a question was posed to me, and I'd like your thoughts on how to answer it, because I gave a clear answer. I don't know if it was right, but I said something. That being said, so why do the government and the politicians acknowledge Israel and support Israel, understanding that the Bible that they read says your house will be left to you desolate? And for some, they have some understanding to the level of knowledge that they've received. But I'd like your thoughts because I said it was only for votes. There are over 5 million Jews, so to speak, because what is a Jew? Now that I understand what it is, what it is or what they are, um, that are in the United States that they can get the votes from. So what are your thoughts? Because that's the only thing that came to my mind because it couldn't have been anything else, and I don't know.
Well, there are a couple of people even on this platform, Sister Pat Kruger and Brother,
Okay.
I think Brother Michael. He's not on this evening, but have been telling me that America is run by the Jews or by the Zionists. I guess there are some other people here also who hold to that perspective that America is run by the Zionists. They say some people think America is run by the Catholics, some people think that it's run by the Republicans. They say the Zionists run America. Now the Zionists are the people who they support Israel, and because of this, when you say the politicians support Israel, it's mostly America, and then America's allies, those who do as America says. Now they say America is run by the Jews and the institutions. They have Jews running the banks and the financial. I don't know enough about it from a historical point of view to give details, but that is in the back of my mind. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons politicians are not into religion, but the American evangelicals are rabid in their support of Israel. I can tell you. I see their comments all over the place. I see them on YouTube. I see them on Facebook, and nothing that Israel does is wrong for them. If they murder everybody in the world, these people would support it because they say Israel is God's chosen people, and they will justify it by the fact that in the Old Testament, Israel was to wipe out the Canaanites. They just go back into that Old Testament mode, and it justifies everything. So that part of America is completely behind the Jews, the religious part of America, and the politicians are behind them because the people influence their politicians, plus the Jewish lobby, which is supposedly so powerful and which controls America. So that's the best answer I can give. I see Sister Esther wants to comment, and maybe, but Sister Susan and then Sister Esther, they might have a better historical explanation than myself.
Well, I wanted to say something about the falling away. It seems to me very clear that there's a parallel between what's going on now and what happened in the early church, but like between our type of movement and the SDA institution, they're going back to the law and the old ways, just like the Jews wouldn't let go and accept Christ as the only Savior. And then of course the other big institution is Catholic, and they of course deny that Christ is worth much of anything, But and I don't think the falling away has anything to do with someone who doesn't claim to be a Christian. I don't think the atheists have anything to do with that. But as far as it being a big issue, there can't be anything bigger than denying Christ, his either his sonship or the fact that he's our Savior. Denying him is about as bad as you can get, as far as it being a big deal. But I just see that so clearly, just going the same way that it did back in the days of the Jews. So anyway.
Sure, thank you, Sister Susan, and that's an interesting point you make at the end. There's no bigger issue than denying that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. So, yeah, maybe as we think of this end time Antichrist, we can look in that direction. Is it Sister Esther? Yes, Esther, our final point.
I recently watched a video that showed clearly that everyone on Trump's cabinet has very, very strong financial ties to Israel. So I just thought that would be interesting to you.
Sure. Thank you, Sister Esther. There is something there. I'm not the most informed on that aspect of it, but I've heard enough to think that it's something that we really need to consider. So thank you for that, and thank you, everyone.